Hello everyone and welcome to the Money and Metals Network online coin talk. My name is Campbell and today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Megan Gooch. Dr. Megan Gooch is the head of the Centre of Digital Scholarship at the Bodleian Libraries, University of Oxford. Megan started out as a numismatist and worked at the British Museum and historic royal palaces in a coin-related curatorial roles. She then branched out into museum learning, working on schools programs, object handling and digital learning at historic royal palaces. She undertook an AHRC-funded research fellowship on audience experience of the First World War commemorations at the Tower of London. Since 2019, she has worked at Oxford, where she led on projects around research data management, digitization, and is director of the Digital Humanities at Oxford Summer School. She's never been quite able to leave coins behind and is currently the Vice President of the Royal Numismatic Society and the Medieval and Post-Medieval Coin Expert on the Treasure Valuation Committee. So today, Megan will be talking to us about Northern Viking coinage. As usual, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat and Megan and I will go through them together at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Megan.
Okay. I'm going to start and I'm going to start here with one of my favourite pictures of Viking coins. I'm looking at my other screen just in case you're wondering, because this is a plate from the Harkirk hoard. The coins were actually melted down, so this is literally the only evidence we have of them, and I think it's just a beautiful image of Viking coins and Viking hoards. I will start with a bit of a sort of health warning in that a lot of this talk is based on what I've done for my thesis, and I can see here we're in some great company of people who know about Viking coins. So if I have omitted anything that's new from the last few years, this is entirely my error. And please, if you've got any suggestions about new studies or new places to look for things, do suggest them. My other health warning is that over the last 10 years or so, the term Anglo-Saxon has been, I think, quite rightly challenged, and as a term that is enabling and related to kind of racist and colonial histories. And actually, one of the big medieval journals changed its name to Early Medieval as a result of that. I'm still trying to bring myself out of well-worn practices of saying Anglo-Saxon, when actually what I mean is English or Wessex. So if I do slip, please do let me know, and there will be I think references to Anglo-Saxon on my slides. So I'm a work in progress and keeping up with actually the best terminology to use about this period. So click on the right place. Viking basics. There's a lot of Vikings in the world, in the past obviously, not now. And they got about a bit. And they were getting about a bit for quite a few centuries. As you can see on my hastily and terribly drawn map, there were Vikings in England, in the Scotland, especially the islands, Ireland, in the north of France and the Low Countries. They got into the Mediterranean, obviously coming around from Scandinavia, and through the Russian rivers down into the Caucasus and into Constantinople. I'm not going to cover all of that here. What I'm going to cover actually is a very small amount of things. So yeah, the Vikings got about a bit. And to cover all of Viking coinage, even though not all of these Vikings had coins, it wouldn't be possible within this time frame. So I am going to focus on Britain and Ireland, but even more than that, there's Mercia and Wessex, what I may have in the past termed Anglo-Saxon. There's a big old, I would say, not exactly border. Borders are really fuzzy in this period, but a political dividing line called the Danelaw, which roughly follows the route of the A5, or the A5 roughly follows the route of the Danelaw border. There were some Vikings who were centred in York, but evidence that they got about a bit around the Humber. There was activity on the west coast of England, the Isle of Man, and even into Ireland. There were some Vikings a bit further south, there may have been the same Vikings at certain points, there may have been different ones, and centred around some of those Norfolk and Suffolk mints or towns. Stop being a numismatist, Megan. Towns where they minted coins, and there were some Vikings centred in Dublin as well who interacted with other Vikings as well. So I'm going to really be focusing in on York here. There was stuff going on in Scotland at the time. People such as Alex Wolff have written on that. It generally isn't numismatic, so I'm just going to ignore that for today. Those borders that I've drawn on here are absolutely not specific, and when I show you some maps a bit later on, you'll see why it's so hard to draw some hard borders. I don't think borders were conceptualized as hard lines in this period, and they certainly were not enforced as such, either politically or economically. To give you a bit of a timeline here, there's quite a lot of Viking kings going on in York. There's a couple of points where the Anglo-Saxons, no, the Wessex kings, get involved in York and take over. And there's also some points, and we'll get to them in a bit more detail, where just honestly, nobody quite knows what's going on. There's a lot of kings in both textual records. There's a lot of coins with different people's names on them. And sorting out a chronology at this point is really, really tricky. Some people have tried, and I will trust them. But, you know, every new coin hoard or coin find that's discovered could destabilise or revolutionise our understanding of the chronology of some of these periods, in particular the 920s and the 940s. And just a quick characterisation of what these coins look like. The earliest ones look quite like the Wessex and Mercian coins, lots of crosses. They love a cross metaphor, really Christian looking. The next period doesn't have a king and is a boring two-line type. That's where my heart is. That's what I did my PhD on, and I looked at them in preparation for this, and my gosh, they're really boring looking. There's a very brief period where a king called Ragnald goes wild with some iconography, so we'll see those later. The 920s, where I said there's a lot of stuff going on. There's also a lot of swords and some quite nice imagery going on. Athelstan, the King of Wessex, who proclaims himself the King of all England, a bold claim, Athelstan, brings some coins that pretty much look like the coins from elsewhere in his realm. And then the 940s again goes a bit wild with imagery, and we'll see some quite distinctive Viking types, including the most Viking coin of them all, a coin with a raven on. There's a last fling with the last Viking king, Eric Bloodaxe, what a brilliant name, where he brings back the sword type of 20 years ago. And then we get much more into what I've characterised as boring, but more traditional Wessex, Mercian and other English type of coins. So we'll see those in a bit more detail. So those first coins of the Viking kings, there is a king called Guthrith who we know of about one reference, but there are loads of coins by two kings known as Siefred and Cnut. This is really an anomaly because Siefred and Cnut are not known elsewhere in the textual evidence. Some people have tried to make some quite, I would say, spurious connections between characters who'd popped up in various annals in the Seine or somewhere in Ireland or something, but no conclusive evidence has been found. And we have so many of these coins because of something called the Curedale hoard, which was found on the banks of a river in near Preston. And it was one of those great 19th century hoard discoveries where it was discovered by workmen building a new revetment for the river, which had some of the bank had fallen in, and some of the workmen were paid off in bits of coins. Some early antiquarians came along and took packages before the landowner or various authorities got involved. So nobody's 100% sure what the whole of this hoard looked like, or how much was kind of sneakily taken away by workmen, or I would say probably more dangerously by these rogue antiquarians, but we have a lot of these coins, and you can see the hoard. It's nearly always on display in the British Museum, along with the non-coin elements of this hoard. Non-coins, called hack silver, little snippets of jewelry or ingots or various bits and bobs of silver, are a big feature of Viking hoards, and it always looks fantastic. If someone says Viking hoards, they nearly always show that because it looks so fab. Go and visit it if you're there. And these coins are so numerous because this was a whacking great hoard. So we've got loads of numismatic evidence and like no textual evidence. But we know these kings were ruling York in the very late 9th century. And the key feature of these is that they love a cross. These are presumably pagan or non-Christian kings. And these coins are like crosses on crosses on crosses. If you can, I don't know whether you can see my cursor. Let's pretend you can't. You can see the top cross there under Cnut has actually got a special feature where you read the coin in the sign of the cross like this. So you read down CN, UT, and then you read R from the top, EX around the coin, which is really rather special because before people worked that one out, they were calling it all sorts of things, crotenu, you know, but it's a real kind of action and a deep understanding of Christian practice to make a cross that you actually have to read in the sign of it. The Siefred Rex coin to the left of that has got cross in the center with crosslets, my favorite kind of cross. The one to the right of that has actually got a cross Calvary or a monumental cross, and the one to the, I'm getting my left and right muddled up, left of that has got an inscription that says Dominus Deus Rex. There's also coins that say Mirabilia Facet, so the Lord, he is king and he made miraculous things happen, so liturgical inscriptions. And there are a lot of Carolingian influences on these with the liturgical inscriptions, some of the crosses, and perhaps even some Byzantine ones with that cross Calvary. So the big question here is the Vikings have invaded York. They've got control. They've decided that the coins that they found in York, which were largely a kind of debased early medieval penny called a stiker, were not what they wanted to use, and they wanted to use money that could be interchangeable with coins south of their kingdom. So a flat silver penny on the same kind of weight standard, made of the same metal, of the same size. But they don't just copy the Mercian or the Wessex coins. They go for this very different style with like so many crosses. So are they working with people from the Carolingian kingdoms? Are they importing moneyers or skilled craftsmen from France? We don't know, but what I think is clear is that they're working very closely here with some of the church people within York. You wouldn't have this level of kind of knowledge of imagery and literacy if you weren't in cahoots with the ecclesiastic administration in York, which is interesting and a thread that kind of continues in Viking York. If I'm asked to describe my PhD in short form, I think I would always describe it as 10th century coins prove that the northerners of York hated southerners so much that they went in with pagans. So they'd rather actually work closely with this pagan invading force than actually work with the Wessex or Mercian invading forces from the south. At a certain point, dates are always a bit dodgy in this period, but around 905, we start to get a new type of coin. And again, it's a little bit of a mystery. The big mystery here is there's no king on it. Now, coins at this period, Wessex, Mercian, Carolingian, all sorts, are well kind of established as having the king on one side, and in Anglo-Saxon, Wessex or Mercian types, having the moneyer, or in Carolingian types having the mint on the reverse. But these just don't have a king. So the question had been asked, you know, why use this because there is no king. Is there a sort of ecclesiastical interregnum? Have the archbishops of York taken over? You think that'd be pretty major, but there's no mention of it in any documentary sources. So we're left with these coins. They're called the Swordless St Peter because they say ski, pet, tree, mo, or the money of St Peter, on what was always thought to be the obverse. I've actually done a die study, more on that later, and it's the reverse. So it's dedicated to St Peter, who was the saint to whom the minster at York is dedicated. These coins go on for about 15 years in varying states of design and literacy. You'll see one at the bottom there as just, I think the original, the terminology you get in 19th century and 20th century numismatic text is retrograde or blundered, because I think it's evident that the lettering has been copied by somebody that doesn't understand what the lettering means, but the idea of having a coin in that kind of particular pattern is still important. So in one aspect, you get some very blundered coins, but you also get some really fancy decorations. So the contraction mark above the S and the C, which shows that it is a contraction sancti, turns into a key, which is really appropriate because St Peter loves having his keys to heaven. So that's a nice thing. There's a little star / marigold thing that turns up on some of them, a rather lovely decorated cross, and a weird little candelabra thing, or maybe it's an omega, pops up to fill the space when it becomes available. So these, you know, relatively stable coins, and we're not really sure what's happening in York, but we assume that, you know, the archbishops have got quite a big element of power, if not are in complete control. One other explanation for some of those blundered coins is that they're actually imitations of this type, and they're happening from elsewhere within the Danelaw, where there's less tight control of the mint and the coins that are being made. After this weird period, we suddenly hear of a king called Ragnald, and he comes big onto the scene, very showy, turns up at a battle, starts making these coins, and they are very exciting coins, largely because they're so rare. There's very, very few of these. If you ever come across one of these in a collection or someone finds them through metal detecting, they are rare. He has a couple of types. One is the portrait type, and I mean, I just love how bad this portrait is, even by the standards of Wessex or English portraits, which are bad compared to, you know, Roman coin portraiture, but they are slightly terrible. They also come with this Carolus monogram, which is the monogram of Charles, so comes from Carolingian coins. There's a sort of O in the middle and a K at the top, an S at the bottom, an R and an L on the sides. The Carolus appears on the next type of coins, which are called the hand type. There was a lovely fanciful idea that this was the hand of Carlos. No, it's not the hand of, it was the glove of Thor. In some of the 19th century numismatic antiquarian literature. And that is because you can see the first one there on the left really does look like a glove, but these are quite clear that they are a slightly poor imitation of a benediction hand, so a hand coming in from the sky, God's hand, that are found on coins of Edward the Elder. I like them, and they're all different, and they don't always have the right number of fingers. And then a final type is the hammer or bow and arrow type, which features a bow and arrow on one side and a hammer. Now, those of you who've seen Marvel films will know that Thor has a hammer. It's called Mjolnir, and the hammer is a really big part of Norse mythology. So, wow, we've really gone from this kind of uber Christian iconography to Christian dedication to St Peter to, you know, a face, pretty standard English thing, and the hand, benediction hand, to whoa, we're into a hammer here. Generous interpretations have also said that this hammer could be a tau cross or a T cross, so that's a normal Christian cross without the top bar. But I think you'll see that the hammers on the coins of the 920s really are hammers rather than Tau crosses. But also the ambiguity between Norse and Christian iconography is a kind of theme throughout these coins. So the 920s is a big period for having swords on coins. There are a couple of different types. There's the sword St Peter. So at the top it says ski petrimo, like the swordless ones, but with a nice sword there. On the reverse, you get a hammer. I think my favourite coin of this era is the St Martin coin that comes from Lincoln. Same deal, ski marti, the money of St Martin, and on the reverse, Linkoja Kivit, coins from Lincoln, but that lovely cross on the reverse I just think is beautiful. You get coins of a king called Sitric. Yes, kings are back. And we do have some documentary evidence of a guy called Sitric coming along and doing some ruling. And he either starts the sword trend or follows the sword trend, not entirely sure which. And there's some anonymous ones where you've got perhaps this retrograde, people are just making some marks and hoping it passes. And also a coin that says Reriva Caster, which was discovered, I think, in the Vale of York Hoard in 2007. When that was discovered, I was really worried this was going to make all the work I'd done so far on my PhD redundant. But luckily, it doesn't seem to have had any impact on any dating. There's some big questions, I think, here that are still unanswered, although I can see Joe Porter is on the call or was on the call and has done a lot of work on the Southern Danelaw. So if I'm wrong, I would love her to correct me. But there's an argument that not all of these coins are made at York, that some of them are either imitations or separate power centres. And of course, we know the St Martin ones were probably made in Lincoln, although there's some kind of debate here because stylistically they're from the 920s, but in the 920s, the sources from the text seem to say that Lincoln was under English control. So it's all a bit messy. But all you need to remember is that they loved a sword in the 20s. Why the sword? It's quite military. This was the thing I was trying to say. The sword of Carlos was again quite a fanciful antiquarian and quite spurious link to Viking culture. I don't think there's really any strong evidence that it's anyone in particular's sword. It's just that they like them. And then we've got an interlude because Athelstan actually invaded York and took control. And this is why, if you have got, and I haven't got one for once, a ruler, you know, one of those wooden rulers with a list of all the kings of England and queens, it will often start with Athelstan, because on one of his coins here, he rather cheekily states Rex Totius Britanniae, or King of all England, because he's now the King of Wessex, Mercia, since that was kind of absorbed, and also York. Kind of forgets that there's a lot more of England, the Southern Danelaw, stuff happening north of York, particularly in what we'd now call Cumbria, that was definitely not under his control, and also probably periods during this his rule in York where he's not got complete grip of it either. So this is a classic case of hubris, perhaps over reality, linked to classroom stationary equipment. As you would expect, a lot of the kind of usual types that are happening, particularly in Mercia, I like to call them flowers and towers, and they are quite attractive. This lovely type by Monia called Heremod, and another one with a lovely tower on Minster. These are seen quite often in the Midlands area, and again they pop up in York. Oh, we've done swords. So this was me trying to work out what was happening in the 940s again after a little bit of time not looking at the Viking coins. And quite frankly, it's really complicated. There are a lot of different kings. There's Olaf Citrixson or Anlaf Citrixson. One's a more English version of the name, one's just a more Norse version of the name. Another Ragnald, it's not the same one as the earlier Ragnald who liked having his portrait on coins. Another Citric, probably not the coin, the one from the swords. And English kings Edmund and Adred, and also the Viking king Eric. So you'll find that a lot of them are doing some more Viking type coins, such as the Triquetra standard, and a lot more are doing some more of these Mercian or Wessex style coins, which are called things like bust crowned, that's just got a crown bust on it, circumscription rosette, so words around the outside with a little rosette in the middle, flower and floral are those flower types, and two-line circumscription cross, so one side's got 2 lines, the other one's just got words around a cross. But I'd just like to draw attention to these really, really Viking types. So the first one is perhaps the one that gets all the book covers, which is the raven type. So I've got that at the top there, and it is a lovely coin. It's really, really stunning. And you see this mainly under Anlaf Guthrisson, rather than Anlaf Citrixson. Oh God, there's even one more Anlaf here that I haven't put on my table. Anyway, and people have definitely argued this is a raven. He's got a hooked beak, so he's a bird of prey. There's some debate, oh, is this an eagle? Is this actually a Christian sign, or is this a raven? I don't know. There's some ambiguity here. And like with the ambiguity about a Tau cross or a hammer, maybe this ambiguity is deliberate. Actually, the Vikings here are hedging their bets and saying, yeah, we want to bring a bit of Norse flavour, but we don't want to annoy the Christians. And actually, maybe we want to bring some of our elites who can read some of the iconography with us into a Christian journey. The other thing that I think is really important about this coin type is it's only one of 2 coin types that has a coin legend in it in Britain that is not in Latin. I'm going to ask a question for the chat. Can anybody name the other coin type in English history that is not written in Latin? Answers at the end. This coin says Anlaf Kunung rather than Rex, so it's got that title. The other sort of more Viking-y coin type here is the Triquetra standard. So the Triquetra is this bottom right little 3-leaved feature, and that has got parallels with things like the Isle of Man 3-legged symbol, which I've forgotten the name of, Triscula maybe, and the other side has got this kind of flag or standard, a bit of a kind of Roman overtones, but I don't think you really see Roman coins that actually look like that. So they're quite pictorial, quite striking compared to the more usual coins that would have been in circulation under English rule of Athelstan, which are, you know, coins that look a bit more like the bottom, words going around the edge, words along, straight along, perhaps surrounded by surrounding a cross molinet, so a little flowery one, or a cross pate, just tiny little cross. And you get various ways of saying onlaf, anlaf. I think that's another anlaf there as well. So the 940s really, really busy. The texts, you'd think, well, maybe that's going to help us. They're not even that helpful either. With all these Viking kings, perhaps some of them in cahoots together. 2 of them are, what is the word? Baptized together, but then disappear out the picture. They're baptized by an English king, so maybe in a kind of subjugative role. And then some of them just sort of appearing from seemingly from Ireland, or going back to Ireland. You know, is there actually a twin kingdom of York and Dublin here, as some people have argued, but they're not making coins in Ireland because the Irish political situation and economic situation doesn't seem to require it at the time. It's very complicated, and there are definitely better scholars than I that can explain what's going on if you're really, really interested in working out what's going on in the 940s. But numismatically, those are your highlights. And Eric Bloodaxe, fantastic name, is one of the players in the 940s. He seems to come along, mint a boring coin, and then go away again, and then he comes back for a second reign, and what he brings back is the sword. So a return of this iconography from the 920s, 20 years earlier. Eric Rex sounds great. Eric ends up leaving York somewhat with his tail between his legs. He flees to the west and is apparently murdered on Stane Moor, which is just over the Pennines. And if you've ever been there, it's really bleak. So I always think of Eric having a really, really bleak end, unfortunately. I think one of the other things to consider with coins throughout this period, we've got a lot of different kings, different perhaps administrations, archbishops, and also Wessex or English kings coming in and out. As you can see on these, they've got the name. This is Aculf Mon, he's the moneyer. Got a lot of moneyers working here, and we've got moneyers who seem to be working across these political administrations, which is a smart move, like having civil servants who work whoever is in charge, but because you value the skills that they bring, these moneyers seem to be at stable points of the making the economy in York. So this is a sort of interlude, which I will say, when the whole time I was doing my PhD, I never even considered. Either I was oblivious or it was not yet such an issue, is that a lot of the symbolism in Viking mythology and Norse mythology and general Germanic mythology has been co-opted by far right, extreme right and Nazi groups. And I'd always joke, oh, my PhD is easy, you know, don't have to worry about ethics. Everyone's been dead 1,000 years. But actually the rise of some of the co-option of some of these symbols, specifically here the ravens, Thor's hammers, and other kinds of symbolism, particularly around pseudo Viking symbolism that you find in some of these groups, is a kind of misrepresentation and a misunderstanding deliberately of this period of history. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of raise that as something that I'd perhaps naively never really considered in the past, that I was having a lovely time looking at this iconography, thinking about Norse myths, and meanwhile somebody else is looking at it and thinking that that is a really handy way to reinforce racist stereotypes. So I have mentioned texts and documents that relate to these Viking coins in this period. I am not necessarily a historian in that. Numismatics is my better skill, although I did undertake my PhD in a history department. If you are interested in getting into this, there's a lot of English chronicles, including contemporaneous Anglo-Saxon chronicles. There's like many versions of them. None of them exactly agree with each other. Plus some later chronicles, some of which, including Ethelwerd's Chronicon and Simeon of Durham's Historia Regum, especially include what are thought to be excerpts from a lost version of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles written in the north. So give us slightly more glimpses into what's going on, even though they're later sources. There's a lot of Irish sources, and definitely better historians than I have worked through some of those to work out these kind of relationships between Viking kings who pop up in those and pop up on the island of Great Britain. And also much later Scandinavian sources, again, really are the source of a lot of this Norse mythology, but build on obviously what were some stories, some actual history and some thematic ideas that were happening earlier. So how on earth do we know about these coins? Where do we get them from? I'm sure you're all aware, and perhaps have even studied, the single finds of coins. These are casual losses, usually found by metal detectorists or occasionally via excavations or sheer luck. And that has our sort of corpus of this has grown over the last 50 years since the growth of metal detecting as a hobby. I'm supportive of responsible metal detecting and work on the DCMS Treasure Valuation Committee to ensure that metal detectorists get a fair market value for their finds, and that museums can have the opportunity to buy those coins for their collections and for the nation. So, and also because it gives us great data, absolutely fantastic data. But what I wanted to highlight on this slide was that actually there's a lot going on. I mean, it could be really easy for me to say, oh, I've just been talking about all these Viking coins, thinking those are the only ones that are found in the only ones that are found in the north. Actually, Vikings are kind of indiscriminate about their use of coins. You can see here that Islamic coins, usually 9th and 10th century dirhams, Anglo-Saxon, or what I mean here is Mercian or Wessex coins, Carolingian coins, and coins from the Southern Danelaw and Northern Danelaw are found all over the place. There is no economic exclusion of foreign coins from the Northern Danelaw, but there's a slightly more effective exclusion of Viking coins from Mercia and Wessex. And it's just worth taking a step back for a second to think about what was happening before the Vikings got to York and started making coins there. The stikers, those early, quite debased early medieval pennies, had a really quite good distribution around York and the Humber, and the Danelaw with scattered distributions around. And also, if we look at Carolingian coins, again, they've got focuses of distribution around ports, such as Portsmouth and Southampton, and also around the Danelaw. And those Northern Danelaw coins, so the ones I've been talking about, are really focused in York, with scattering around the Danelaw, but we just don't find very many of them south of the Danelaw. And that's partly perhaps due to effective exclusion of them, but also partly due to the fact that the finds of these are far less numerous than other types of coins. And again, we see quite a lot of Islamic coins. I mentioned that the Curedale hoard has lots of hack silver. It also has lots of Islamic coins, these dirhams, because the Vikings are absolutely happy to use any bits of silver, chop them up, weigh them, and use them in the name of economic trade. The other key source, as always, for the numismatist is the hoard. And if we look at hoards, and by the way, I haven't got Ireland on these maps because I've only got data from English sources. So that's why also Wales and Scotland look quite sparse. But I have got better data for hoards. And you can see that hoards are found again in kind of trading points from these Northern Danelaw ones across the north, and also clustered in Ireland, which kind of perhaps bolsters up some of our thoughts about this North Sea trading zone. And also you get coins from Wessex and Mercia, minted, but also finding their way into Ireland, and also some of the same hoards as these Northern Danelaw ones. I think a final point from me is thinking about not just distribution of the coins, which I'll just finish on, which is to say that it's quite apparent from all this data that the coins made in York mostly circulated in York, but also circulated where Vikings circulated, including some of the Scottish islands and Ireland, and that definitely the Vikings were not enforcing foreign coin exclusion, and were using as either hack silver or money by weight Mercian, Wessex, Carolingian, Islamic coins, all sorts of things, as long as they got the job done of exchange. So really the question was then, okay, so are these coins just kind of like political, I was going to say medals or tokens, but they're too numismatic and I don't mean that. Are these showy pieces and purely to make an iconographic statement? Are they actually using them as money? Like, are they making enough they can actually be used for as a medium of exchange, or are they just making some to kind of give them to them their high status friends? And I did a die study, which is, if you're not familiar, is a giant game of Snap where you try and work out how many dies were used to make a coin series. And the Snap bit comes in trying to work out which coins were made from the same die. I didn't enjoy it. If you love doing a die study, good on you. The world needs more of you. But I'm never going to do another one in my life again. And I did a die study of the Swordless St Peter type, and also pieced together die data from other studies of other Viking types. And there's a kind of dark art to die estimates by saying how many dies that you think from that sample of extant coins might have been made. And then there's a sort of further kind of bit of magic where you think, well, if that's the number of dies, how many of those how many coins might those dies have made? And that answer varies between 15,000, 30,000, maybe more per die. So you're looking at some big numbers. But the more you go down that path, the more kind of variables you've got and unknowns. So you've got the unknowns about what our sample size of coins are, and then you've got unknowns and variabilities in how many coins each die can make. So really, my kind of baseline against what we do know in terms of low and high estimates, and actually you can see some of them are quite wild. The Triquetra type has got quite a high variation there. That's because it's a very, very low sample size, to be honest. The Swordless St Peter is much more, and the Sword St Peter are much closer because the samples are slightly better. But you can see there that the estimate of how many dies per year were used to make these coins sort of vary between, about 10 to about 100 at the lowest estimate. And if you compare that to work that other people have done about die studies from the wider early medieval period, you can see that that's probably not too wild, actually, about the number of dies being made or used in the major early medieval English mints of Lincoln, Winchester, and York. So the big conclusion there really is that the Vikings weren't just making a few for their friends. They were actually probably making some, if not all, of these coin types as legitimate kind of coins for the medium of exchange. And I just wanted to end on giving some kind of do read further notes, realizing that this is probably quite out of date. For anybody who's interested in the Northern Danelaw or Kingdom of York, Mark Blackburn has written a lot of it in the British Numismatic Journal. Gareth Williams, former curator of early medieval coins at the British Museum, has written extensively, especially around hoards. And James Graham Campbell, great on hack silver. Hiberno-Scandinavian, so stuff that's happening in Ireland. Andy Woods, who's now at York Museums Trust, and Kristin Bornholt Collins, really expert on the Manx material. Joanne Porter on the Southern Danelaw. A lot of the iconography I've been working with from Anna Gannon. Rory Naismith is your big name for anything early medieval coinage, and Simon Coupland for Carolingian. There's some names there for some Scandinavian stuff, but that is definitely not comprehensive. And just some of the names that you will come across, usually in the British Numismatic Journal, in some of those 10th century players from the 20th century, including Michael Dolly. Nobody knows how many articles he wrote because he seemed to just write a zillion. And there's lots more work that has been going on in recent times that I haven't caught up with. So if you're interested in doing more, use this as a starting point. It is not the end point. You will find out more things. Thank you.